Hi, welcome to this National Association of Catholic Chaplains Town Hall meeting. Father George Williams, until recently, was the Catholic chaplain at San Quentin State Prison. I've got about 30 years of prison ministry experience. Now I'm the pastor at St. Agnes Church in San Francisco. And our co-speaker today is Sister Ilaria Buonriposi. She's a Comboni sister who's and the topic today is trauma and ministry. And we all have been through several days of trauma, but we live in a stressful time. And anytime you're doing the kind of work that we're doing with prisoners, people who are getting out of prison, families, victims, the entire prison correctional system is traumatizing for people who in any way interact with it, whether they are prisoners, whether they are staff, whether they're families of either of those groups or chaplains. And so it's good that we can have this conversation and learn from Sister Ilaria's experience and from yours as well. So hopefully we'll have a conversation about this during the next hour. If you don't have access to a microphone, you can always type your questions in the chat feature and we will monitor that so we can include you in the conversation. So Ilaria, would you like to begin?
Sure. Good morning or good afternoon, according to where you are in this huge country. And my name is Ilaria Buonriposi, as Father George said. As you can hear, I'm Italian, but it's around 10 years that I live in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm a Comboni Missionary Sister. My religious community is an international one. And we are like in 35 countries. So after my profession in Italy 30 years ago, I was assigned to Spain, where I studied, where I got a BA in social work. And after that, I was sent to Peru and Colombia, where I ministered for about 17 years, with some time spent in Ecuador. And now it's like 10 years that I'm here in the US. I mentioned Peru and Colombia because they have an important part in my story. Peru lived a civil war between 1980 and 2000 that left behind like 70,000 people dead, most of them indigenous people, very low income people. And there were millions of people displaced to Lima, to the capital where I was living, because of the violence. I arrived in Peru the last 3-4 years of the civil war, and my neighbors living in the slum where we were living, all our neighbors were internally displaced person coming from the mountains who had lived horrible things. But what called my attention, I was an outcomer, very innocent and very naive in these kind of things. And I knew everything that books say about the violence in Peru. And I was, now I know, re-traumatizing people, asking them what they had lived in the mountains. But there was all this silence about it and nobody was talking about anything. So in a certain point, after several years, in Peru, they created a commission of truth and reconciliation similar to the one they had in South Africa, if you have heard about that, where there was a lot of listening of the victim, of what the stories of the victims, and they were public hearing. And I participated to many of those public hearings because I wanted to understand with my heart what was going on, and also to accompany my friends because they were heavily involved. I could see that they were reliving many of the stories. And the process of the Commission on Truth and Reconciliation, lasted like a couple of years. And there were several initiatives, but I was able to see the power, the healing power of restorative justice, even if at that point I didn't know that that was restorative justice. And then I went to Colombia and I found myself in the opposite side. I was in the side of the victims. I was living in a city of 300,000 people where we had at least 40, 45 murders every week. And I was working with kids who live in the street. They were killers, even if they were 8, 9 years old. And I have witnesses a lot of violence, and I've been threatened several times. At that point, I realized that would have been beautiful to have in Colombia something like what I have just seen some years before in Peru. But I didn't realize while I was in Colombia that I was traumatized by what was going on, because I was the nun there and I was there to help people. So I couldn't allow myself to see myself some like, this is bothering me, this is creating problems in myself. So I just want to share with you my video. I hope I'm able to do this because I'm not very good. Can you see it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, when I'll do, okay, so I can see even you, but I cannot see the chat. So at a certain point, I will ask you if you can write something in the chat. If Father George, can you read it loud for me? Because I will not be able to see it.
Yes, I'll read what they say.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is more or less what we are going to do now. So the introduction, you already heard it. Complexicon is like a game, not a game, but something like a game that we are going to do together about the word trauma and resiliency. And all this, what I would like the questions I would like to answer in this time that we have together are these questions. What does trauma look like? Are you experiencing trauma? What can I do to reinforce my resistance to trauma in my ministry? And am I projecting my trauma issues on others? I did forget to tell you earlier in my introduction that it's in all this moving in between countries, it's like 30 years that I'm a prison minister. I am a volunteer. And despite the big part of my experience in trauma comes from the experience that I had in Colombia and Peru, I do understand how sometimes the experiences that we are having environment like a prison it can be disruptive on in our lives. So feel free to, if you have question, comments, or Ilaria, you are speaking half Italian, half Spanish, and we don't understand, please feel free to write it in the chat. And that's it. Okay, let's start with this. I would like to have like a generative, communal creation of meaning. Both resiliency and trauma are words that we all have heard in several opportunities and in several contexts. But probably we all have a different understanding of these words. Like when I say tree, I have a clear image of a tree for me, but probably is different of the one that Karen or George image that they have in their mind. So whenever the next slide comes up, I would like you please to write in the chat how you define this word. And don't be shy. There is no an official and that definition that everybody has to share. Any definition is welcome. And that's it. It's okay? So now, whenever the word comes out, please feel free to write how you understand, which is your understanding of, in this case, trauma in the chat.
So, unhealed wound. I just wrote wound. Anybody else? Hurt or injury to body or soul.
Okay, anybody else? Because not everybody is fast thinking.
Oh, physical assault, somebody wrote.
Mm-hmm.
A deep wound that impacts a person for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Disturbing or distressing to mind and soul. Something carried physically. That's looks like most of us.
Okay. And as I said, there is no right or wrong definition. And I guess I have the feeling that whatever you have said up to now, it's what trauma it is. I found this is a formal definition, but whatever Father George had read up to now, it enters here. Trauma is the effect of events that are emotionally and psychologically overwhelming. And these events can be something that happens like an accident, earthquake, an assault, but can be also something that repeats in time, that I'm thinking someone in an abusive relationship, physically or verbally or emotionally abusive relationship, extreme poverty can be something that causes trauma, the lack of security of getting what is needed to cover our basic needs. But not all events are traumatic for this in the same way for the same people. Mm-hmm. So there is an idea, is a concept that is called traumagenic. Traumagenic is an event that can create trauma, but I don't know, I had the experience of having sisters of my community in a car accident, and in the long term, they were, beside physically, thanks God, was everything fine, but the emotional and psychological charge of that accident in the long term was different in every sister. Mm-hmm. But there are many events that can be considered, they're called sorry, I'm messing up. They are traumagenic. They can potentially create trauma. And these traumagenic events often involve threats to life or to our body. They give feelings of helplessness, terror. They are definitely overwhelming, and they paralyze our ability to cope or respond to whatever we perceive as a threat.
Mm-hmm.
And can lead to a sense of loss of control. We are not able to control our life. We don't have any say on that. And at the end, challenges a person of the group sense that life is meaningful and orderly. So traumagenic events can be a civil war, the result of the election for whoever loses these elections, community events. I'm thinking in my religious community, there are several events of sisters that have been kidnapped or murdered, and that affects all of us, beside the sister who were in the story. And so everything that in our lives can create some of this can be a traumagenic event.
And Ilaria, can I sort of
sure.
But for a second, because I had done my doctoral research dissertation on staff spirituality, burnout, and resilience, and what you're describing here is exactly what people often don't think about in terms of the prison environment. But prisons are in themselves traumagenic events and environments, not only for the prisoners, but also for the staff, and that includes chaplains. And so all of these things that you describe in terms of threat to life, terror, helplessness, overwhelming, loss of control, are kind of unavoidable realities of working and living in prisons. And so as we go into them as other volunteers or chaplains, we need to be aware of this because we're going to be exposed to this constantly.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for adding this. And also in other ministry, talking for the experience of my religious community, we serve usually in areas or population that are living very stressful and traumagenic situations. And we have to be careful in ministry to keep in mind, at the back of our mind, that these are things that people can be traumatized. Not everybody is traumatized in the same way, but this is something, because otherwise our ministries are going to be less effective and less bringing life to people if we don't keep this in our
Exactly. And I know you're going to talk about this, but it's exactly the thing that we need to remember, that just being around people who are traumatized isn't in itself traumatizing. It's, a vicarious traumatization that is the reality of the kind of work that we encounter when we're working with people who are suffering.
Thank you. Yes, that is definitely what we are going to talk about. But or just before getting to this secondary trauma, I would like to say that there are many kinds of trauma. Personal, individual, community, related just to one event or many events. So this is not the place where to do a big do about that, but just to let you know that if you want some, I put at the end, there is a slide with the resources, but there are some books that definitely can help if you want to explore more this topic, like this one, Waking the Tiger, gives is Peter Levine. It gives a very in-depth, but at the same time, not for people who has, sorry, Father, a PhD language. I don't have it, but I was able to understand it. I mean, it's for person like me, people like us normally. Nothing against PhDs, but it's just to say a simple language. So now we are going to talk about, as Father George said, secondary trauma, because it's the one that, so us as ministers, we can have our own personal trauma that we carry in our lives, from many of us from our childhood, or for events that happened to us But also we are exposed to the trauma of others, as Father George said. So even if in the lucky case, that I don't carry any personal trauma on my shoulders, I can definitely have experienced secondary trauma because I'm exposed to the trauma, the narrative of others. And at the end, it's like the cost of caring for others. And this is valid for prison ministry and many other ministries, and also works. All these nurses and doctors, all these persons that are working to fight the coronavirus. Now they are coming out statistics that many of them are affected by secondary trauma because of of what they have experienced. And the secondary trauma or vicarious trauma can have negative effects on the person and also on his or her friends, family, and job. Because if we don't take care of our trauma, secondary, primary, whatever you feel you have, we become ineffective in our work. We violate more easily boundaries in our relationships. We tend to withdraw from friends and family. And there is a high risk to make bad judgments, which personally I do anyway. So when there is this trauma part is going to be good. But how do I know if I have something similar to secondary trauma? There are many you can find also in this book and others, like this one is The Body Keep the Score, which is of Van der Kolk, and is listed in at the end also in the resources. If you look around here, just Google it, you can find 3 million different things talking about, which are symptoms or signs of secondary trauma. And this is like a summary, but at the end, if you feel that you have physical exhaustion or mental or emotional exhaustion, probably it's worth it to give a better look to that, to see if it's just something that I didn't, when I woke up this morning, it was a bad day. It wasn't a bad day. It can happen to everybody. But if most of your day become bad days, maybe it's worth it to give a look for your own health and the health of everybody that surrounds you, emotional health. However, there is a light at the end. Levine says several times in his book, the trauma disrupts life, but however, trauma does not have to be a life sentence. My personal experience that when you are in a trauma, I don't want to use, in a moment in which trauma is very strong in you, at least personally, I tend to get stuck there. There is no exit. There is no future, which leads to the loss of meaning and purpose that we mentioned earlier. And it costed me a lot to see that there was a light on the other side, and a lot of friends and professional help that they were there to keep me on track. Don't give up. There is an exit. And now I can really be a witness that it's not a life sentence, and your wound is still with you, but it's scared, it's closed. It's not an open wound. You cannot say, oh no, I didn't go through that, because it's part of who you are, how you are. And I would say also, it makes you the beautiful human being that you are now. It's part of that. But it's not a life sentence. You can move on from that. So how do we move on now? Let's do again what we did earlier with the word trauma, but this time we change word. So when the word will appear on your screen, please share a description of what it means to you. How do you describe it in the chat? And please, every definition is welcome. This is not an exam, and so feel free. Ready?
Mm-hmm. So the ability to adapt and cope despite threatening or challenging situations, ability to bounce back, ability to bounce back and move forward, ability to bounce back from adversity.
Just we give a sec to the slow thinkers to jump in eventually. Mm-hmm. I'm a slow thinker for these things. So usually when chat move on, I'm okay. Just starting to type.
Able to go with the flow.
Interesting.
Strong resistance.
Three, two, one, move on.
Okay.
Okay, this slide is useless because you already said everything. But resiliency, also of resiliency and resilience, there are 3 million different versions and definition. But is this is ability, and I want to highlight the word ability, to cope with whatever is going on and keep our good health and energy when we are under pressure, bounce back, overcome adversities, and be flexible, change the ability to change our way of working or living when an old way is no longer possible. And this is something that we all are doing in the last 6 months in one way or water, or in a way or other. And it's a I have to say personally, I don't do it very well about coronavirus, this change of, but I'm trying to do better this, adapt to this change of working and living. And the thing is to do all this without acting in a dysfunctional or harmful way. Because when there is a loss of meaning, and the trauma can definitely trigger the rage, the anger that we have inside, sometimes reflect on ourselves, and so we start to act in dysfunctional or harmful ways for us or for others. But there is a good news. Resiliency is teachable. Sorry, I did something wrong here. Resiliency is oh, sorry, I have to move. Sorry, I'm just moving because I don't see anything.
We can see this slide.
But I wasn't. Okay. I wasn't. I had the faces on top. I apologize. Oh, Ilaria. I was able to work up to now. So it's something that allows us to persevere in the face of doubt and discouragement. Is strengthened. Okay, our resiliency is strengthened by inner calm in the midst of the storm, ability to see options clearly, to be able to shift perspective and respond in a flexible way in choosing action and so on. The good news is that all these characteristics are innate in our brain. Nobody can say, I will never be resilient, or because our brain is structured in a way that we have them, all these abilities. Now, we can have differences in how developed they are, how we have been nurturing them in our life. But resiliency is teachable and is learnable, and we can always recuperate it from our brain. And that is a good news. So I shared just 5 minutes before, I am not dealing very well about with the changes that coronavirus is imposing on all of us in our way of life. But I know that somewhere there is, somewhere in my brain and in my person, there are these resources that I can tap in. And maybe I have to strengthen some now, but they're there. It's not something that, oh, well, I was born without, or lucky those who are able to be resilient or are more resilient than me. So now I would like to invite you to do some practice about this. I found an interesting short exercise that we can do together. And it's one of the million things that you can find definitely in books and online on how to strengthen your resilience. This one calls us to practice gratitude. Okay, so I invite you to take a comfortable position. If you want to close your eyes, do it. If you don't want us, the rest of us to see you with your eyes closed, you can momentarily close your video. If you want to be sitting on, do whatever you feel comfortable to, and nobody here is to judge. So I invite you to pause for a moment and notice any experience of kindness, gratitude, or awe that you have experienced today or that you remember from the past. Maybe your neighbor drove you to and from work for 3 days, or this morning there was a beautiful sunrise, or you went for a walk and you saw this colorful display of leaves on the trees. It doesn't need to be something big, something that surprises you and that make you think how beautiful, something that you stop and say, oh, that's nice, that's beautiful. So now I invite you to attune to this felt sense of goodness and what that provoking you. Warm, maybe you feel your body warmer. You feel that your heart is lighter. Or you recognize that whatever you're thinking about, it makes you smile. And I would like to invite you to dwell in this feeling for about 10, 30 seconds, to savor it slowly, allowing your brain the time to really register the experience and store it in the long-term memory. And then I'll invite you to intentionally try to evoke again this same image or act of, that you have for at least other 5 times today. Because when we repeat these positive feelings, we rewire our brain, and this becomes a resource for our own sense of well-being. It's like when you go to the gym, if you go once a month, yeah, it's good. If you go once a week, it's a little better. And if you go 2-3 times a week, it's definitely good. So we have to be intentional in doing this kind of exercise, that we need to tap in our resilience. And this is one of the many small things that is possible to do. And definitely there are many. Meditation is a good practice. Go for a walk is a good practice. Without talking on the phone, just looking around and erasing everything from your brain. I find that for me it's very good to be in the sun, to be, well, during summer I try to avoid, but when there are beautiful days like today, to spend time outside is something. And I think everybody knows inside what is good for them, what recharges them. So I invite you to do it purposely. And these are some of the resources I use for this, to prepare this small time together. There are other. I hope, Father George, you can add ideas, and definitely I left behind something else. So you're more than welcome to jump in.
Well, these are a good start. There's a lot of stuff online as well, resources you can Google, and that would be, I think, also helpful if you don't want to read a whole book.
Yeah, definitely. This is it. So I don't know if there are questions for Father George or for myself, or comments, sharing of experiences. You are more than welcome now. The floor is more than open.
We'll keep track of the chats too. So probably be either you can voice your question or comment or write it for us.
Can I remove this, the resources? Did people have time to eventually copy something, or?
This will also be available.
Oh, okay. So
yeah, people
can
check it out later.
I can do this so I can see you better.
I would just want to add that, when I was doing my research on this, I was, working around chaplains and staff members, and it was pretty clear that the things that were most effective in helping people maintain resiliency and avoid burning out as a result of the trauma there was having a really strong connection to other people. And that meant that, you know, having friends, having outside connections and activities from work. And this is especially true if you're doing prison ministry. You want to be around people who aren't doing prison ministry, you just want to be around and connect to people. That's why church is so important too, in community. But also having that sense of religious identification or a spiritual practice, whatever that spiritual practice is, as long as it's something that's clear and articulated and done, like you were saying, Ilaria, about, you know, like exercises at least once a week, but preferably on a daily basis. That also helps people deal with trauma and remain resilient. And finally, just cultivating a hopeful outlook. And I mean, right now, the times we're living in are really challenging us to do that, because we have to be looking for where there's light and what seems to be an awful lot of darkness. And so, but that takes a willful effort on our part. So, because again, the nature of this kind of environments that we find ourselves working in, the nature of the society we find ourselves living in, wants us to give up hope and despair. And that's just society, that's also the evil spirit. So spiritually, it helps us to be discerning and be paying attention to where the light is in our lives. Karen asks, could you talk about techniques for those in the prison? Do you specifically mean for prisoners or for staff or for chaplains, Karen? And you're on mute.
Recognizing them in the prisons, and I was going to just kind of add on to that, is that, you know, how can we recognize trauma in those that we're ministering to? I mean, you know, because you know, somebody you don't know, and you know, it's hard to say if it's a mental illness or if it's, you know, what are some, you know, those signs, so many of them, the fatigue and the, you know, the sleeping, all that could be for so many reasons. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I was just curious if, you know, if you have some, like a code or something on how to pick that up, but then also, is there things, ministerial techniques that you've thought of?
Ilaria, do you want to address that first?
It's true. Those things can be for many things. And also, I don't think it's wise to go to someone and say, excuse me, are you traumatized? That's not a good thing. But beside the joke, I want to say, you gave me the opportunity to say something. We have to be extremely careful, because we can re-traumatize people, and without wanting. So when I said at the beginning that I was going to people and ask them to tell me what was happening in the mountains in Peru, and why people were coming down, because I read everything and I knew it, but I wanted the story. I was naive, but I was re-traumatizing people, because they were not ready to not even acknowledge for themselves what was going on. Mm-hmm. So this, I think, is a very fine line to walk. First of all, because my impression is that many people, at least my experience, is that I don't recognize that I'm traumatized. I have to arrive to a break point to recognize it, and sometimes it's too late. So, but if people start to tell you about having nightmares, for example, having nightmares, or constantly easily startled by noise or something, that can be. I'm not a clinician, but I think those can be signs that something is going wrong. Just so you're going to laugh, when I was in Colombia, I said I was a tough situation, and I was in a completely different environment. I was in a different country, and I was in a meeting of nuns. We were like 100 nuns there in a completely safe country. And I was talking with a nun that I didn't know, that made things worse. And there was some wood on the, you know, a chair put on the near the wall, but it wasn't stable. While we were talking, this chair fell. And what my body recognized that was someone shooting, because it was a loud noise. And I have an interesting reaction, I would say. And this sister was like, where did you go? Because your body keeps memory of what scares you, and it makes you react to defend yourself. It's a good thing because you are defending yourself. But if you are in the wrong moment, wrong situation, is not what was happening. But you don't have time to process here what your instinct tells you. So, and I didn't know I was traumatized at that point. So it's if someone could have asked me in that moment, I would say, "What are you talking about?" But to help people to look inside in a safe way, safe in the sense that it doesn't re-traumatize, and if they're willing to talk, well, otherwise direct them to professionals. Sometimes we need professionals, but also to create environments where people can feel safe in every sense, not only physically safe. And that's, in my opinion, is the best way, to starting with the assumption that somewhere someone has trauma, to dealing with trauma. I don't know, Father George, if...
No, I agree. I mean, I would say that I would start with the presumption that everybody you meet in prison is going to be traumatized to some degree, because trauma just means hurt. It's a Greek word for wound. And the prison system, by definition, hurts and wounds people. It's made to do that. And that includes prisoners, and it includes staff. And so, and it's not like every trauma has to be something like you see or witness something horrific. It can simply be being in an environment where you have this sort of subtle feeling all day of being on guard, because you never know if something's going to happen or you're going to get hurt. And then add to that, what the correction officers see almost every day: fights, attempted suicides, stabbings, and then having this also hostility of people who resent them, and having things thrown at them. So, I mean, they're walking around as these balls of trauma often, and so, as you're saying, partly what we can do as just chaplains and volunteers is to be kind to them and to give them a chance to express themselves, and not just always go in there with the sense that, you know, we're only there for the prisoners, and ignore them, because they're human beings too, and they really, and to the degree that we help them thrive in their job, we actually make the place better for the prisoners ultimately too. So, but I would say that the bottom line, to answer Karen's point, is you don't necessarily have to see signs of overt trauma in the prison system. Just assume that everybody is dealing with either recent trauma, or, as you know, most of the men and women in prison have dealt with some horrific childhood experiences of abuse, and that stays with them too. And that can be re-triggered by things that they see and experience in prison as well. So it's just like this, we're working in a trauma circus. Any other questions or comments or experiences people want to share in the few minutes we have left? Mary, I know in your experience with CPE, you've come across this in supervision and in your own experiences, right? You're on mute, Jim.
Yeah, but I'm encouraged by the fact that that resilience can be learned, but people have to want it. They have to want to get beyond the wound, and I guess spend enough time with the wound to kind of understand it and learn from it, and then move forward. Yes.
Yeah.
Father George, I heard there's that the prison, it was a contemplative prison fellowship. You know, they had some amazing stories of about people, you know, just taking contemplative prayer and putting people in a circle in the silence and allowing them to sit, and then things coming up is referring to what Ilaria was talking about, creating a safe environment, just a place where they can be. And, there's so many programs that were going on at San Quentin. Did you see that process, or was that there? Or?
Oh, all the time. And I think that's the value of a lot of the kinds of things that we can bring to incarcerated men and women. Along those lines, though, we also have to be careful. Oftentimes, when you're dealing with people who have been severely hurt in their lives, and they find a safe place, and this stuff starts to come up, you have to find a way to contain it with them and for them. And prison is often a difficult place to do that, particularly for men, because the men have been really trained and socialized into keeping this stuff bottled up inside. So when it starts, if you tear the can off of the top of that can of worms, watch out. Because I find often a lot of guys, when they start processing their traumatic experiences, they end up in the hole because they don't allow themselves to emote, but they will express their hurt through anger, and they might get in a fight or something, or punch one of the guards. And so you have to be very sensitive to, and this is where, Ilaria, you're talking about professional. I mean, be sure you are allied with and working with mental health in the prison system, with some of the social workers or the other mental health professionals who can also provide backup and support for the healing that has to happen. But the healing process also requires often people to deal with some pretty awful things, and it has to be in a safe place. And unfortunately, prison is not safe. So we have to try to create that safety for these men and women. And the other thing is, you don't have to be experts on this. You don't have to be a social worker or have a PhD in this. There are people who you can draw upon for assistance, for help, for guidance, supervision. The other thing is, don't do any of this stuff without supervision, unless you have like the professional expertise, and even then you need it. But be sure you can, don't do things that are beyond your level of competence. If you have questions, go to the chaplain, go to the lieutenant or the COs in charge. If there's something that's of concern to you, you don't have to solve all the problems on your own. You can't.
Yeah, I want to commend what Mary T, what you're doing, the CEPE part, because I always feel like that people that are doing spiritual direction or definitely this kind of ministry, they need to have supervision. They need to have an outlet or a space to reflect on what they're carrying, because as Ilaria, you pointed out so well in this, is that we, and you as a sister, as you always talk about your nuns, you're doing good and you're going out. So we're totally oblivious to the fact of what we're taking on and what we're carrying forward and how it's emoting. We're emoting, maybe not socking someone in the face, but we find other venues of letting people have it.
That reminds me, Karen, I mean, one thing that I think I'd be remiss in not saying is, if you're going into this work, you have to have a really good, solid bedrock of your own spiritual life. You have to be doing the practice yourself. You have to be praying. You have to, the evangelicals talk about, armoring themselves with the armor of Christ and all that. Whatever term works for you, you want to go in there protected and connected to God, because if you go in there unprotected and unconnected to God, you're going to get chewed up and spit out. So you really do need that, your own practice of spirituality. I found, obviously Jesuit spirituality, but yoga is really helpful for me. Any kind of meditation, as you were saying, Ilaria, but that connection is utterly essential. And for us, it's the sacraments as well.
Thank you.
So we have about 2 more minutes. Any burning questions or observations before we finish?
I just have one thing that to me is very important, because I've lived with many sisters who've been in traumatic experiences in Africa and all over. In our one community in Italy, 9 sisters in one community died of COVID, 9 in one. So that must have been, it is a traumatic experience. You have so many people in one community die. And I think one of the most important things is to listen. I think if you can't you're not an expert, but you can listen to the person. I mean, really focus and listen to the person and let them tell their story without judgment. I think this can be a great gift to the people. Also, it's a gift to have someone share their story with you.
It is, and especially for prisoners, no one ever listens to them. So you're right, that is one of the greatest gifts we can give them. Ilaria, final words?
Yeah, I would, something came to my mind, but I think Mary was going to say something.
Well, it's past, but I was just going to say that, even when a person has a breakthrough and wants to let go of the trauma, they still have to live into that truth. It's not a magical thing. So the importance of support is so critical in all of this.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. And it just came to my mind, something extremely important is not to dismiss the personal experience.
Right.
And for example, I have in mind the story of a sister, one of our sisters. She was living in Israel, and years ago when they had all these bombs in markets, and she was in a market, in a cover market during one of these bombings. She wasn't hurt, but she was extremely shaken. So she went home, she went to the community, and they asked her, are you okay? And she says, yeah, I'm okay, physically I'm okay, oh good, everything is fine and so on. But after a while, she started to have a lot of nightmares about their experience. And one day in the community, she said, sister, I'm having nightmares about what happened a month ago. And the sister were like, oh, you shouldn't. I think all the people who died there, you are lucky. Why you are worried about this? And I talked with the sister, like, she told me this experience like 4 or 5 years after that. And she said, I never talk about death anymore. I still have nightmares.
Yeah.
So never, the fact that, yes, she was lucky. Yes.
Post-traumatic stress,
But,
I think that would be a great kind of a segue in a way for another conversation on dealing with post-traumatic stress, because that is a reality that people have, and you can't just white knuckle your way through it, like. So, well, thank you, Sister Ilaria, and all of you for attending. This will be recorded, and we will have it on our CPMC website, along with our other webinars. So as a resources for anyone doing prison ministry or working with people who are maybe coming out of prison or family members or anything like that. So thank you for joining us, and thank you so much for all your preparation and great insights, Sister.
thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.